Well, that was exciting. And as I mentioned to Kelly, possibly we need a different NBN. But anyway, it's another comment. Good evening. I'm Jane Cowell, Executive Director of Engagement and Partnerships, and I'd like to welcome you all to State Library of Queensland this evening for what is sure to be another interesting Queenslander in Conversation event. Welcome also to our online viewers on Facebook Live or via the State Library website. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay respects to our ancestors who came before them and to their elders past, present and future. The location of State Library on Kurilpa Point is historically a significant meeting, gathering and sharing place for Aboriginal people, and we proudly continue that tradition here today. I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome our event partner, the ABC, in particular tonight's facilitator and ABC Radio Brisbane presenter, Kelly Higgins-Devine. And Kelly has been with us on our journey of Queenslanders in Conversation since 2016 when we started with Belonging. So thank you so much, Kelly. Our four panellists I'd like to welcome who will be sharing their insights and expertise with us today are Alan Broad, Professor Marcus Foth, Kat Matson and Dr. Colin Russo, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Throughout this year, State Library has been exploring the theme of digital futures, how technology has given us new tools to question, understand, imagine and improve the world in which we live. The Queenslanders in Conversation series is one of the programs held at State Library to provide a platform for lively discussions on the massive changes occurring in our world through digital innovation. Tonight's conversation will focus, as you saw on the video, on the future of our cities and what makes a city smart. Thank you to Citios and Vinci Energies for the introductory video, which gave a snapshot of some of the new and emerging technologies that have the potential to improve the productivity and sustainability of our cities. And no doubt our panellists will be able to expand on these for us. We will also address what are some of the issues and threats and how we can address these to build smart cities and towns that work for all Queenslanders and don't exclude anyone. As with everything we do here at SLQ, Queenslanders in Conversation is designed to be participatory. So we encourage you to join the conversation and share stories, insights and questions online using the hashtag #DigitalFutures. On-site guests are also welcome to join in the discussion when Kelly throws the microphone to the audience for questions later in the evening. We really do want this to be a conversation and not a one-way lecture. If you didn't get the chance to have a look at the Digital Futures Lab here on Level 2 prior to tonight's talk, we welcome you to do so afterwards. The space is a hybridised studio, game space and exhibition and will remain open until 8 p.m. tonight and can be found to the left of the lifts on your way out. And I do encourage you, you'll see that it's an exhibition that's been built, again, a participatory experience by visitors, and you have a chance to put your thoughts on the wall as well. You may also like to join us at other activities and events during the remainder of the year, including our weekly Wednesday Playdays, where you can have an in-depth experience of the Digital Futures Lab and try your hand at awesome cutting-edge technologies. Program a robot, discover 3D printing and contribute to our augmented timeline. You can also experience virtual reality and if you want to get physical, play on the Wii. And our next Queenslanders in Conversation on the 1st of November is where we'll be exploring the digital human, to what extent the digital world is merging with the human body and the impacts this is having on our day-to-day lives. So if you'd like any further information on State Library events or exhibitions, please have a chat to one of our staff. You've seen them in the T-shirts. And head to our website or pick up a brochure from the registration desk on your way out. Just a reminder, as this event is being recorded and live streamed, the front doors have been locked. If you need to exit the venue, please do so from the rear of the auditorium. There's a door up the back. We are proud to be partnering with the ABC for tonight's Queensland in Conversation talk, and I'm pleased now to hand over to tonight's facilitator, Kelly Higgins-Devine. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, and welcome. How many are repeat offenders being here? Been to a few? Thank you for coming back, and welcome to everybody for whom this is their first visit. Well, it looks good, doesn't it? It'd be nice if the traffic lights actually worked so that it let traffic flow rather than just banking us all up in the same places. I like the idea of driverless cars, but Volvo has a bit of a problem with driverless trucks in Australia, and we might find out why with this panel this evening. And the idea that somebody would tell me where there was a car park rather than driving around mindlessly for half an hour, that appeals to me as well. But we'll be asking the question tonight, what makes a city smart? How do we build these smart cities and towns so that they work for everyone? As the Internet of Everything starts to transform where we live, are we empowering or are we dividing people? And how can Queensland use technology to improve livability, increase productivity and enhance citizen engagement? So welcome to this third in our series of conversations this year on the theme of digital futures. Let me introduce your panellists this evening in alphabetical order. Ellen Broad. If I could ask Ellen to come up and take a seat. Ellen was instrumental in the Open Data Institute's policy work with governments and businesses. She's just come back to us from overseas. And there she was exploring how the potential of open data can be unlocked and data infrastructure designed to maximise benefits for everyone. And while at the ODI, Ellen joined the Office of the Secretary of State for the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs as the Secretary of State's expert advisor on data. Ellen sits on the policy board of Telefonica's Data Transparency Lab and is a member of the Environment Agency's Data Advisory Group. She's written for New Scientist, the British Medical Journal and Huffington Post, among others. Ellen Broad, welcome. Professor Marcus Foth is Professor of Urban Informatics at the QUT Design Lab, Creative Industries Faculty at Queensland University of Technology. Professor Foth's research brings together people, place and technology. His transdisciplinary work is at the international forefront of human-computer interaction research and development, with a focus on smart cities, community engagement, media architecture, internet studies, ubiquitous computing and sustainability. Professor Foth founded the Urban Informatics Research Lab at QUT in 2006, when most people didn't even know what that meant. What are you talking about, Professor Foth, they said, but they gave him the lab anyway, which is good. It was ahead of their time and before the term smart cities became popular. He's also been appointed to the Built Environment Task Force of the Smart Cities Council, Australia, New Zealand, and the Infrastructure Innovation Task Force of the Queensland Department of Infrastructure, Local Government and Planning. Please welcome Professor Marcus Foth. Kat Matson is the Chief Digital Officer for the City of Brisbane, and Kat's charged with the digital transformation of the city as a means of accelerating economic growth and equipping small to medium business enterprises with the digital skills to accelerate their business. As an experienced digital and startup strategist and respected business leader, Kat drives the Digital Brisbane strategy. She's a passionate advocate for human-centric smart cities, recognising that digital is an enabler and not an outcome in its own right. She's a regular panellist and moderator for key industry events and endeavours to discern trend from fad in the digital space and determine how businesses can leverage new technologies to reach their full potential. Please welcome Kat Matson. And our fourth panellist this evening, Dr. Colin Russo. Dr. Russo is a professional futurist facilitator and award-winning engagement expert. He's worked in a number of local and state government roles for executive and policy clients, directors general and CEOs' offices, political offices as well, workplace training and technical roles, and he focuses on the delivery of futures workshops, foresight and engagement action learning. He provides advice for the creation of smart city strategy and delivery of stakeholder and community co-designed initiatives. Dr. Russo contributed to the Journal of Futures Studies and the Futures Journal. He's written about city futures, smart state futures and alternative engagement futures. Please welcome Dr. Colin Russo. All right, well, I suppose the first question that I'll ask you all is, what does a smart city mean to you, if you can sum that up. Ellen?
Sure. So at the Open Data Institute, we quite often describe a smart city as being an open city, a city that has people and openness at the heart of its operations and its design. For those of you who don't know the ODI, it was established by Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, and Sir Nigel Shadbolt, one of the world's experts in artificial intelligence. And we actually have an ODI Australia network headquartered here in Brisbane as well. So just very quickly, those two concepts, openness and people, being at the heart of a smart city. To borrow a line from Kat's introduction, we very much support the notion that a smart city is one in which digital data technology is an enabler of services that work for people, whatever their needs are. And openness is really important in the technical sense. When we talk about openness, we talk about open source, open data, open standards, the mechanisms through which we can make technology adaptable, modifiable. At the moment, every Australian city has its own travel cards, its own vendors, their own slightly fragmented systems, and we'd like to see in the digital landscape that we avoid some of the issues we've had in Australia in analogue, our rail gauge problems, for example, by trying to build systems with openness at their core.
Professor Foth?
What Ellen said. I'll try and expand it a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't believe there's just a smart city or one smart city, but there's multiple. And I'd like to think of at least three right now. One is the image that we just saw in that video, the vision of technology enabling so many different utopian possibilities, but a lot of them are really driven by corporations, software vendors, service providers in order to drive efficiencies, automation, productivity, and growth. And a lot of that is important because, as you said earlier, if you are stuck in a traffic jam, we really want it to be more efficient. And so there's nothing necessarily wrong with that idea. But a lot of it is driven by these commercial interests. The second one is, I suppose, the one driven by cities themselves, by local governments, by city administrations, municipalities. And I think they're interested in moving a little bit away from the typical roads, rates, and rubbish, the three R's that a lot of us would associate a local government with, and looking at the opportunities not just with regards to technology and infrastructure, but also looking at what it can do for the efficiencies, the optimization of the city management. And then the third one is the citizen one, and that's the one that I'm most interested in, although I acknowledge that it actually has to be, in a way, a combination of probably all three of these puzzle pieces. But the third one around people, residents, citizens, people that actually occupy, inhabit, and make a city come alive, I think that is the last piece, and it's probably the latest addition to the thinking in the smart city space, especially in the kind of mainstream commercial marketing kind of era. And so I think that's the one that is the most challenging, but also the most exciting.
Kat Matson?
This is so awesome, being the third, to build on this narrative of what a smart city is.
Imagine how Colin feels.
I know. What Ellen said, what Marcus said. A smart city is one that helps its people do what its people want to do more of, or better, or easier. I remember when Twitter first hit, when I first got the potential of Twitter. And what was so exciting about social media and that the social web was that all of a sudden, us everyday folk could do what the big corporates had been able to do before. We had a level playing field. And I started collaborating and talking and connecting with people all over the world, people who I'd previously held in the highest of regards. And that analogy for me is really gets brought back into the smart city conversation. It's how does the web, how does the technology, how does the Internet of Things help me do my life better and easier, but without taking away the human elements? I have some fundamental challenges with the phrasing of smart city. I have some fundamental challenges with the video that we just saw, in terms of a smart city is not just sensors and devices put on streets because we can. Yes, changing traffic flow to enable emergency vehicles to get through, that's awesome. But do I want my device to tell me that there's a traffic jam this morning and therefore I should actually take a totally different route to get to work, and in fact I should use totally different public transport, but what that then stops me from doing is getting lost or discovering something new. So it's a smart city has to be one that finds that balance between the convenience that we all have with our devices, but without taking away my human connection with the city. I guess also too, the last thing I want to see is a smart city where we're actually all so connected with these things that we no longer make eye contact. We're just constantly being driven by various instructions. There was something else that I wanted to, a smart city also therefore needs smart people, and I don't mean intelligent, smart people. What I mean is people who are capable and able to participate in emerging economies, emerging jobs, emerging industries, with a smart city framework also that obviously sits in front of the assumption that technology is having an increasing role in our lives. We talk about driverless cars in a smart city, we talk about robots when it comes to future of jobs, all those kind of things. So how do we make the people in the city more able to connect and interact with literally the opportunities of the city, whether it's jobs, whether it's arts and culture, whether it's the parks. So a smart city isn't just about smart tech, it's about the thing that actually makes a city, and that's its collection of people.
Yeah. Dr. Colin Russo.
Thanks, Kelly and Kat and Marcus and Ellen and the video and the audience. But I'm just sort of wondering if I know the audience will talk back, but will there be artificial intelligence in our video? Well, maybe in 5 or 10 years from now, like we have Siri today. And that is the future of smart cities. It's wondering about that kind of merger between the internet of technology and ICTs, or information communication technologies, smart city data, and as we know, just the products and services that we all use. So, is there going to be a medium line, a balance between those, between technology and between smart people? And that's the thing about cities today. We need to be able to make sure that cities actually provide the education, information and awareness that communities need, so that they can make educated decisions about the use of technologies, so that we control technologies and technologies don't control us. So the long-term view is very much about trying to find a balance between smart people, smart citizens, and helping technology to be an extension of ourselves and of our consciousness, of our preferred futures. And hopefully that's where smart cities is going to take us, to give us, but in order to create a sense of what our preferred futures are, and therefore the role that technology should play in society, I believe in working on city futures, and that's sort of taking citizens through a process of understanding the long-term future for their cities.
Okay, just staying with that then, if we look at smart cities and the future, is it possible to design a smart city that works for everybody? Because I imagine if I asked 10 questions of what people wanted in their smart city, you'd get 10 very different responses. So, you'd get responses that varied across those 10 questions. Is what we're asking tonight even possible to design a smart city for everyone?
Well, I think it is. At the moment, Australians are very busy designing frameworks for smart cities. If you look at Melbourne as a city, it's actually looking more at sociology. Its smart city vision is much more about how smart city technology can help its deaf and blind people, and that's very much part of its smart city vision on its website today. But if you look by contrast at the Sunshine Coast City Council's website and its futures, its framework for the future of smart cities, it's very much about monitoring energy, monitoring the use of water, and making cities much more efficient and giving cities their city the infrastructure that they all need. So it's a process that is comprehensive, but it sort of is much more balanced. So we're looking at social inclusion, economic innovation, democratic futures, governance and foresight, so that technology can work across all domains in a city. And that's how we can make it inclusive for everyone.
Yeah. Marcus?
I think to answer that question of whether a smart city is for everyone, especially a future smart city, it sometimes could be useful to look into the past. And so the tagline actually reminded me of this, in urban planning and urban design terms, quite often used reference to Jane Jacobs and Roger Moses, who were looking at the expressway in Lower Manhattan. And in a way, the discussion was around the helicopter bird's eye view from above, from looking at the planning perspective. You would have plans, you would have ideas of where the highway should go and so forth. And you had trajectories around growth and so forth. And then you had Jane Jacobs, who was kind of advocating for a pedestrian, for a street perspective, to looking at the planning scenario from within the city. And they were clashing. And I think this is something that still hasn't really been resolved, because part of planning is that we do have to have this bird's eye view, but we also want to then hone in on the nuances of experiences, of situations, of not trying to make everyone jump through the same kinds of hoops. And I think that kind of crudeness is something that the technology might be able to balance, but it's still not really the responsibility of the technology and of the infrastructure to do that. And so there is this risk that we are outsourcing or delegating agency, human agency around decisions to this infrastructure and say, well, the infrastructure is there, it's providing now services for everyone. But that actually needs to be questioned.
Well, isn't that the price of utopia? That you have to hand over some of that human beings actually can't be trusted too much with peace, and isn't that the basis of the Matrix movie? That too much happiness actually isn't the human condition, and we need someone to tell us what to do, if that's robots and technology.
I'm not sure if it's the price of utopia, but it might be the price of democracy.
Yeah.
Because there's certain conflicts of interest embedded in. We are now talking not just about the infrastructure, but the governance systems of cities, and so it may not be in the interest to actually give everyone here in the room access to the data and the possibilities of that data, which is something that we advocate in our research, and we produce prototypes in order to demonstrate what power we could unleash. But with power being unleashed, there's obviously a need for regulation as well. And so those kinds of things have to go hand in hand like a yin and yang.
Yeah.
To come back to that question of designing cities for the future, I think we have to be careful that we're not designing cities for the future through the tech, as distinct to designing the city for the future that we want. So in my case, but in this case it's Brisbane. What is the future for Brisbane that we want to design, knowing what it is that we already love about Brisbane? And then how and where does tech potentially play a role? I think one of the challenges that I have with the smart city conversation is we do keep getting caught up in the micro level of what it could do. Wouldn't it be cool if we could do this? Yeah, maybe, but more importantly, what are the values? What are the values that we're actually using to drive the decisions of what pieces of tech do we look at, let alone implement? And it comes back to Ellen's comments too before around being open. So the technology enables us to be more open, be more efficient, potentially provide a more personalised experience of the city, but making sure that that personalised experience doesn't actually just have me become isolated. Can the tech be used to deliver more efficiencies in the right way, which therefore can actually reallocate resources to the city? So for me, when we're designing the city that we want for the future, it's actually not about how smart do we want the city to be, rather it's what are our other values for the city. In Brisbane's case, we have Brisbane Vision 2031, which has a whole lot of values around what it is that we love about Brisbane, and then how does the tech support us?
Ellen?
In terms of technology and systems, I don't think it is possible or ever will be possible to design a smart city that works for everyone. And that's because people have different needs, different attributes, different experiences. And so designing a city that works for everyone is ultimately about enabling choice. If you're someone who prefers to access your services online, you can access your services online. If you prefer to talk to a person over the phone, you can talk to a person over the phone. this is really important because we know that we have problems within the technology systems that we're developing, and that diversity is very hard to code in. Just today, there was the story of the veterinarian who was denied a visa for Australia because she scored she's an Irish woman, she scored a lower than high-level performance on the oral kind of entry test, and it was an online automated test run by a computer. And it was very clear to me, despite the assurances from the technology provider, that the challenge that they had there was a lack of diversity in their voice recognition training data. They found it difficult to recognise the Irish accent. And these are the kinds of challenges that we are getting into when we talk about developing systems in the future that work for everyone. Our culture will have to change. The companies designing our technologies will have to change their approach, their culture, the kinds of people they have working on their teams for us to see that happen.
Well, I'm still screaming at Siri because it doesn't understand me. So, are you all screaming at Siri too? And I interact with Siri like it's real, and I abuse it, which I'm sure is part of the problem. I think I've had the theory for a long time that tech is actually already self-aware and it's just messing with us. So who will be marginalised by this? We'll get to the positives soon, I promise. But who becomes marginalised once we get these smart cities? Ellen?
So, I mean, there's so many different things that a smart city can be. It can be, you know, we've seen the video with the traffic sensors, the lights, the in times of an emergency. Personally, what I worry about quite a lot at the moment is the ways in which the systems that we design keep people in the places they are in now, make it harder for them to have choice, make it harder for them to access services that are not predicted to be for them, that are not designed to them based on what their data says about them. So I worry that what we will actually, in effect, see is a further marginalisation of those groups in society that already experience marginalisation, the elderly, low socioeconomic areas, minorities, recent migrants. We will just see a deepening of those existing structural barriers.
Sorry, Kat, you mentioned getting lost. Is that what you were talking about?
No, when I was talking about getting lost, like some of my best coffee shops or gin joints I've discovered because I turned the wrong way.
Yeah. Oh no, sorry, that's what I meant, that we will not, in a smart city, we will lose that ability if we just tap into that to just wander. And, you know, that old saying, not all who wander are lost, but...
Well, and I mean, for me, it's that distinction between efficiency and effectiveness, isn't it? You know, like, sure, there are times when I need to get to my next meeting on time. I don't want to be hot and sweaty because it's an important meeting, whatever it is. So I want the most efficient way of getting there. But there are other times that I want to meander and discover a cool bookshop or a gin joint, or actually there's some great bars in Brisbane. You know, like, discover the cool things that actually have me go, look at that. That's what's magical. But yeah, part of the tech will actually also... We'll take that away. And I mean, we already see it in social media, where we all kind of hang out with people that we like on social media, and we all serve up the memes or the news headlines or the commentary that we know that our friends will like, and they validate that we're right because they all come in and say, I couldn't agree more. And then when somebody comes in that has an alternate perspective or point of view, we go, oh no, you're wrong, because all of my friends over here are telling me that we're right. And, you know, if you expand that out, if you extrapolate that out into a city context, what does that do? You know, like, we'll literally have people walking on the right side of the road and the left side of the road saying this is right and this is wrong, because we keep just perpetuating that that's how it's meant to be done. We've got to create the space for the humanity part, but also, again, remembering what's the role of the tech. The tech is there to help us be human, not take away human choice.
Marcus? And then Colin?
Very early on, I studied computer science, and I still have this technical background. But then, in the meantime, I did a master's in the humanities and digital media and a PhD in urbanism, so I kind of see the social side as well. But when I listen to Kat with the computer science, with the pointy head on, I would immediately kind of think, well, myself or colleagues would would pick up, she loves coffee shops, gin. Here's a whole bunch.
Gin joints.
Facebook knows
Here's a whole bunch of recommendations. Here are the favorite gin kind of outlets that you are going to be sent to if you visit a new city, for instance. So these recommender systems are actually picking up on exactly these kinds of challenges. And I think the problem isn't necessarily that there is a lack of diversity. It's that we are inside a walled garden or a filter bubble where we believe that a certain part of the city is the city, and we don't see the rest of the city. We just had the privilege of having a little tour of that Digital Futures Lab, and there's a section that talks about walled gardens. So with our colleagues in digital media and the Digital Media Research Center at QUT, we're looking at algorithms. Algorithms are the kinds of bread and butter of what makes not just a smart city work, but a lot of the social media that we use, a lot of the technology that we use on our phones and on our laptops. And there's a problem in the way that these algorithms are programmed, because for so many different corporations, they are there to keep us all in check. So if you are Mark Zuckerberg and you have to deal with over 1 billion users on a regular basis that are accessing your website, you got to make sure that people don't fight too much. You got to serve them new content. You got to deal with all of these kinds of expectations. And so algorithms have taken that over. So if you log in, the news feed is not curated by any human person other than your friends and algorithms that kind of put this together. And that all works very nicely if you are looking for like-mindedness, sameness, and homophily. But if this is now bleeding into our cities, we actually have a problem, because cities thrive on diversity, and we've had these accounts already of what the repercussions are if we don't have that diversity anymore. And so if we are inside an echo chamber or filter bubble, inside our cities, we're actually missing out on a lot of the discovery of difference. And so I'm, completely agree.
And tolerance of difference.
This idea of, losing yourself in your city as well. And it's about serendipity. There's serendipitous encounters and the sagacity to actually realize them.
We can certainly make conscious the visions and the preferred futures that our citizens have. And there's this quote by General Eisenhower that says that simply that plans are useless, but planning is worthwhile. And because he's trying to make clear that planning is this process where we actually work with communities, work with people to shape their ideas, so that the plans aren't sitting on the shelves, but the plans are actually part of what's shaping the city on a daily basis, because a whole range of people from different demographics are actually able to take part in the decision-making process and feel that they belong and have a sense of identity with the plans themselves. And so they can take the preferred future for a technology-driven CBD, or a technology-driven innovation hub, or environmental sustainability hub, out into the community with them, and work back collectively with global consciousness, to sort of crowdsource and generate new ideas and sort of broaden out the issues that they're dealing with, so that it becomes much more than just the council or the state government working in a silo, but connecting them up with preferred futures that actually satisfy the challenges that all demographics face. And we know that we're currently talking about climate change, fuel depletion. There are major issues of population growth, urban growth, that cities are having to plan for. So while we're planning for the Gold Coast becoming twice as big by 2050, so it's 550,000 people there now, 1.1 million by 2050, that creates an enormous flow of energy into planning new streets, which will become smart city streets, new houses, which should be smart houses, and facilities, which should be cultural places that have got capability for great cultural transformation, and hopefully have smart technology interwoven. But the emphasis there is on asking our communities what they would like, where they see our cities in 10 years' time. If I said to you, Brisbane is actually going to be twice as large by 2060, so it's actually 1.1 million now in population, but imagine by 2060, so 30 years' time, seeing Brisbane as twice as large as it is today. Now, the problems there, of course, that smart cities will introduce gentrification, so that if you bring all of this great infrastructure into a city and make an area of the city, might be West End, it was traditionally not a smart city area, but it was a very smart cultural area, a lot of university students as well. Now, if you transform an area and you make it a smart city area, then by virtue of that, the prices of property rise, and of course, the median or median rent, weekly rent, rises. So what happens to people who can't afford the price of real estate or rental? They move out of an area. So that's this disparity and gentrification that smart cities could potentially bring if we didn't encapsulate smart city futures as part of a much more holistic future, a future that we can all take part in, and help to generate futures that we think could work across all domains, not just technology.
Mm. So let's get to some of the positives, Ellen. A smart city. What would be the first thing that you would say? Right, that's what I want. If someone said, Ellen, one thing. What are you putting in there?
Do you want the personal thing?
Yeah, let's do personal.
Well, then this would require an appeal to Coles and Woolworths to open up some of their stock data. Because personally, what I would like to be able to do is, as part of my journey planner on the route home, to not only say I want to get from A to B, but I need to pick up some sour cream and some Himalayan rock salt. Not that I ever buy Himalayan rock salt, that's just put me in a particular category. But
yeah, she's the sort that has that in pink salt.
But to be able to enrich that part of my daily experience. But of course, for that to happen, we would need that data to be more accessible, to be able to say, okay, well, or even to just simply say things like, I want to go via a bottle shop that has X, that has gin. Yep. See, I'm looking out for you as well.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
So please open up some data, Coles and Woolworths.
Yeah.
All right. How about you, Marcus?
I have the hope that the way that the smart city development unfolds, that it will actually make more people interested in moving beyond just the kind of consumerism that we assume as engineers, as software scientists, that's really what is at the core of people, that there's, the eat, sleep, gym and repeat and so forth, so that you actually find an ability for more people to co-create the future of cities, to be involved in various ways, according to their ability and according to their interests. But it's not so much a technical challenge. There's already so many tools for us to get together, to collaborate. We are looking at ways to break out of these filter bubbles. But I think the next challenge really for the smart city then is the policy and regulatory reform, where a local government embraces the energy and I suppose the input, the creative input from the citizenry of a city, so that it's not just the community consultation where we ask a couple of questions and then we think we know and then we just go ahead and build a casino. But we might actually understand to a more nuanced level of what different groups of people, what different communities, what different organizations, how they can make the city their own. So there's this saying in academia that has a very huge body of literature around the right to the city, and we are kind of looking at the right to the digital city, or the right to the smart city, that the smart city is for everyone, which is a bit of a utopian aspiration, but it's actually those kinds of challenges that we are trying to unpack and understand.
What would be in yours, Kat?
I was going to say, I feel like I'm about to say what Marcus said and what Ellen said again. I couldn't agree more. Open up just the personal convenience data, and for me that would be expanded into, and tell me whether there are seats available at that favourite gin joint, or do I need to go a different way and find one that's quieter. I couldn't agree more with Marcus as well, because one of the opportunities that I see in a truly smart city, and this is why the people are so important too, is that we do have an opportunity to collaborate across all sectors of the community, the business community, startups, entrepreneurs, not-for-profits, the whole kit and caboodle. And a classic example would be You see it in the Facebook groups. When you're in your community Facebook group, somebody says, "Hey, do you want to build a community garden? Wouldn't it be good if we could all grow our own fruit and veg?" Harnessing the resources to do that can be challenging. We see this in charities where we have umpteen different charitable groups all working towards the same cause. So wouldn't it be awesome if in a smart city context we could actually help residents, businesses, people harness and galvanise around their interests, whether it's a community garden, whether it's mental illness, whether it's what the city should look like, what we want to do with the river, and actually elevate that conversation so that all players can see it. So, you know, when we look at that example of the community garden that just got bulldozed up on the Sunshine Coast,
Here.
instead of that happening in an awful way, everyone's involved in the conversation from the beginning. You know, so that conversation happened at a really local micro level. Let's say it started in a Facebook group or in a community hall. But if all stakeholders can be involved at first, in that case, you know, the council can say, you can do it, but, or if you're going to do it, this is how. And then, you know, so my wish is that we can have that collaborative framework. That's not just a tech play though, that's a paradigm as well. That's a culture shift.
Colin, what would be first up for you?
Well, first up, I think all cities would have a long-term plan so that they could actually get ahead of, you know, because there's so much change. It's really accelerating and people are kind of fearing the future. You know, they're fearing the obsolescence of cars, and we've seen the Uber industry take up, you know, the role that taxi drivers traditionally had. So there's this fear of robot futures. And, you know, potentially 10 years from now, you know, rather than going to Woolworths, there won't be a person to talk to. We'll just be checking in, checking out without actually speaking to someone. No one to say good morning, good afternoon, how are you?
I already do that.
They already do that. It's coming through. And
Automated checkouts.
Yeah. It is a trend. So having, and I know Brisbane is the only city in Queensland at the moment that does have a long-term community plan. So it has Vision 2031. Now, all cities in Queensland did begin that process of long-term planning, but that requirement was repealed, and it's probably something that we need to put back in to start thinking 10 and 20 years ahead. But for me, I'm really excited about, you know, when I see things like, you know, throw the words Elon Musk in there and think about the future. Think about electric cars that, you know, will be actually, you know, rather than the car sitting in the car park, it'll be driving itself back out this evening, and it'll be, you know, basically earning money for you because it's out there being used as a taxi. So you know, it's really going to. But what about the idea of internet in space? You know, there's now a proposal from SpaceX to launch 4,425 satellites into space to recreate the internet in space. Now, the hope there,
We can beam it down instead of using the NBN?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and that will save us a lot in terms of, you know, having to plan, rather than, you know, digging up council services to actually lay you know, upgraded NBN services. We'll be able to direct stream it from space. But if that happens, that will add in potentially 60% of the world's population, and giving them access to smart cities that they've never had before. And all of our partners, our trading partners globally, will increase in size, and potentially there's the idea that the internet will become free at that point. Now that's getting the same sort of speed, digital access, fibre to the node that we're currently experiencing in homes. But another example is Adelaide City, that's currently got a 10 gigabyte network plan in place that will speed by 400 times your access to download.
Everyone's moving to Adelaide.
I was going to say, don't talk about
But this is
speed.
it. If these things don't come into being, and we all kind of laughed at that because, like, you didn't know that would make me move to Adelaide. But there will be areas that will be the poor areas, and you will think to yourself, wait a minute, what's the internet like there? Or what is my access to services there that they get in one suburb that they don't get to another?
Well, it's not just the speed access, it's also the device access. So at the moment, like pretty much everything that we saw in that video relied on a degree of interaction with a personal device. There are still people, believe it or not, who don't have one of these. You know? I know, it's shocking to me, but that's... Yeah. But there's people who don't want one of these.
Yeah, they don't like them and they don't trust them.
That's right. And, well, just because they don't like them, there are many times when I'd like to throw this up against the wall. So, but does that mean that all of a sudden, if I don't have one of these, the benefits of the city are taken away from me?
Can I comment on
Yeah,
those
sure.
two last? I think we've got to be careful of drinking the Kool-Aid of Elon Musk and the tech engineers and so forth. And in a way, as I said earlier, I'm counting half of myself in a way in that community a little bit, but I also see the other side, and that side is a bit scared because I think if we just see, well, the lane is full, we build another lane, and then that is full, we build another one, and we build a hyperloop, and if we have an energy crisis, we build solar panels. We don't actually have an energy crisis, we have a consumption crisis. The fact that there is this idea that we can solve humanity's problems by just installing solar is just putting a little pause in our demise, because the actual fabrication and logistics of making those panels, of digging out rare earth minerals, of putting them together, of building inverters, of building the circuitry, of replacing them when they need to be replaced and so forth, is actually not solving our climate crisis, because it's just looking at efficiencies and it's looking at a solution within the capitalist system. I think what the smart city can actually do is question some of the assumptions with regards to our economic framework and with regards to the growth paradigm that we live in, because it may not actually be the best solution for us. And so the more progressive ideas around a universal basic income, for instance, or blockchain, or the way to actually arrive at a genuine reduction of our consumption, those are the more genuine kinds of challenges that the smart city might be able to tackle, but they're at the moment at the margins. It's really quite weak signals right now that hopefully will ramp up. But talking about the devices in response to what Kat was saying, I think the other problem is that we don't necessarily consider in that smart city conversation where they come from and where they go. So when we talk about these billions of IoT devices being installed in all these cities, well, a lot of them are battery powered. The battery, if it's lithium ion, requires a lot of cobalt. The cobalt is mined unregulated in the Congo. And if you go to the Washington Post website, there was a very good piece, investigative journalism piece, about what actually happens at these mining sites where the cobalt is mined that we all carry around in our pockets in these small phones. I actually have the fallacy of driving an electric car, so I probably sit on maybe a couple of kilos of cobalt right underneath and inside that battery. And so at some stage, that's going to be phased out because of planned obsolescence. And so then all these devices, they go either to China or to other countries outside our purview. And I think if we talk about the smart city and marginalization and access and the impact it has, we actually do have to have that international global perspective to kind of see where does it end up, what are the negative consequences on other communities by us investing in IoT devices, for instance.
We'll go to Q&A in just a moment, but Ellen.
I just had one, so I agree with so much of what has been said. I want to put a little pin in universal basic income because I know that is very, it's discussed a lot right now. Elon Musk talks about it, Mark Zuckerberg talks about it, we discuss it. My only challenge with it is it presumes that what leads to inequality is income-based, when we know that there are many different kinds of inequality, and simply giving everyone the same starting income will not resolve some of those underlying inequalities.
Totally
so
agree.
it can help, but I get particularly alarmed when I hear people talking about it as a replacement for some of our other welfare services, and then I think, oh no, well, we can, it can be a supplement to, but we'll still always need other services to address inequality.
That's a good pin.
Yep. Okay, well, I think we've got people with microphones, do we? Yeah? All right, I'll come down here and then we'll go there.
Better.
Hi. Question for the panel.
Hello. I'm Elizabeth Handley and I'm president of a group called Brisbane Residents United. One of the comments that I would make is that I think our government doesn't trust our people to give them good opinions. Just an example I would use, I did a community consultation with Fruit Park at Milton where the community actually designed that park. and it's a park that people love to go to. And I know it's just one small example, but a second one that I would use as well is that I believe Jonathan Shree over at West End actually sent out to the people in West End a list of the projects that he had proposed for the amount of money he had to spend in West End, and asked people to vote on that. And to me, that's a very good use of technology. And I acknowledge that it means that you have to be on it if you know to be in it. But I think if we trust people a bit more than our governments have shown that they do at the moment. And I'm just wondering what your comment on that is.
I'd love to quickly comment on that. I'm not sure that it's a trust issue. I think it's the bandwidth required to receive all of the input. You know, in the past, community consultation groups have been limited to how many people you can get into a room and then how many people you can meaningfully have a conversation with at once. They take time. One of the things that I get very excited about with digital platforms is that you can actually do that en masse. So going back to what I was excited about at the top of the conversation around Twitter, you know, what if we applied that thinking into a civic engagement process? Yeah, I saw that community engagement process from Councillor Sree. I also saw that the Premier of South Australia just launched something very similar yesterday, where he said, you know, there's half a dozen key projects, vote on them. So, you know, and the technology exists. I can't say what we may or may not do, but absolutely. So I don't think it's a trust issue, I just think it's a bandwidth of receiving all the information.
What you discussed is called participatory budgeting, and I discussed this with Councillor Shree as well, and he said it actually has been very well received, not just by his ward, but also by other councillors within Brisbane City Council, and they're quite interested in doing more experiments in that space. But you also got to consider the budget allocated for the participatory element is tiny compared to the entire budget of the council, and so at the moment it's really quite baby steps in that direction.
Hello, Jamie Wilson from Your Digital File. One of the main concerns that I've got is what stage do we start worrying about privacy? I love the idea of being able, with AI, absolutely love it, and I mean, even down to Your Digital File and understanding the people and the market on a social level, and as we've seen with Donald Trump. But if we're going to start putting a whole lot of these systems out in the city, what happens once it's been breached? We see the ransomware constantly on the increase. What about being at the forefront of privacy?
Ellen,
we're all looking at Ellen.
Oh, great. So I think there's two different issues there. There's one is data security. There's like the security of our systems, and the other is privacy. And they are, you can still have issues around privacy whether or not that there is a breach or ransomware. Privacy, I think, is something that we are going to have to reckon with in the near future and reframe what it means. Because personally, I now worry more about where I don't know my data is. All of the systems it is in that I have no visibility of and I have no control over, and I couldn't quantify, if I tried, how many different ways in which my identity is scattered across services. And so in my conception of privacy going forward, it isn't actually about pulling it back towards me and wrapping my arms around it, because I know the benefits of my data moving relatively, like in relatively frictionless ways, but giving me control, giving me visibility of where it is moving and how it is moving. And that's particularly important because as we move into artificial intelligence and as we move into automation, we are increasingly going to be on the receiving end of automated decisions that are made about us without us needing to submit data at all. The only way in which you can reasonably challenge those decisions, because quite often the algorithms behind those are very complicated, is to have data to validate it with, to say, well, if you came to that decision, hang on, this is what I've got. Why is the output different? And at the moment, we have very little easy access to our own data to start to be able to exercise those processes meaningfully as we move into automation, to be able to say, well, hang on, I can tell that there is something not quite right in whatever output that you've put to me.
Is there also the element of, sorry, we'll get to the question in a moment, the unknown unknowns? Like I mentioned Volvo earlier.
The kangaroos.
Volvo and kangaroo, tell that story, because there may be, in the world of driverless trucks.
I definitely don't think, the AI that we think of as being superhuman is 5 years away, or potentially even 10 years away, because it's actually really messy and it's really complicated. And for example, Volvo has been confounded by kangaroos in Australia bouncing in front of driverless cars, because we're the only country, I think, that has giant bouncing animals. They don't run at cars, they bounce at them, and that throws the LiDAR, the technology that's surveying the landscape, out of sync. And there's so many messy examples of that, the kinks that we're still trying to iron out.
So we don't know, basically, we don't know what are going to be our challenges with even building a smart city, things we didn't even take into consideration because normally they're not a problem for us.
And we expose them all the time. We know things like facial recognition software has difficulty recognising non-white faces, which we didn't know. There's lots of stories coming out now about we don't know what we're not seeing online, so women are much less likely to be shown ads for high-paying jobs online. Surprise, surprise. But of course you don't know that because you can't see what you're not being shown. So we have a lot of lifting, exposing the seams to do.
We had a question just up here.
Is it on?
Yeah,
just keep talking.
Yeah, it's on. Sorry. Moving on with that sort of problems that you face building a smart city. In a city like Australia, cities in Australia, particularly Brisbane, that have really low population densities compared to places like America and parts of Asia, actually implementing these sort of smart city systems. I know particularly with our public transport at the moment, outside of the very inner Brisbane, isn't so great. So actually implementing these sort of wonderful things in a place where we don't really have the population to sustain such infrastructure. And I know sometimes the governments can be very sort of nervous to spend that much money, that much input, if there's not enough people to use it. So what's sort of your take on particularly actually building these smart cities in Australia?
I think that's actually one of our advantages, insofar as that we're not going to build stuff that we don't need before we need it, and that there is that extra thought. We haven't, Brisbane in particular hasn't gone down let's just do it because everybody else is, and doesn't it sound really sexy? I also think that it means that we have to get smart about how we do it, and one of the things that we look at when we're talking about the infrastructure is how do we make sure that we're implementing the VHS version, not the beta version, whatever the beta or the VHS version. For those who are watching who don't know what VHS and beta are, Wikipedia.
Get on the internet. We used to call them encyclopedias.
But so how do we make sure that the technology that we're implementing doesn't rely on high volume or high frequency? Gatwick Airport have just put in 300,000 sensors to do some pretty cool stuff, like beacons. That's 300,000 beacons. That's a lot of devices that at some point in the not too distant future are going to need to be thrown out, replaced or whatever. So I actually think it's an advantage that we have to keep thinking, I guess with using my current limited jargon, it's around how do we use the existing platforms that we've got, like the internet on our phones, like Wi-Fi repeater towers, like signals in traffic lights. How do we use the existing infrastructure rather than build extra stuff on?
And I think we'll be pleasantly surprised when we actually look at cities in central Queensland and right to the very western border of Queensland to know that they are very much interested in city futures and smart city futures. And I was just in Dalby, about 2.5 hours from west from here, and very small communities, but they are extremely excited. They've developed their own innovation hub. They've started to look at what their regional neighbours are doing, and they're starting to connect up so that they can actually participate not only locally but globally, so that they're identifying strategies that work well in regional areas and and they're actually looking at how they can use technology to their best advantage. So it's certainly something that is sweeping right across Australia, the smaller cities as well.
Howard Briggs, I'd like to ask a question of the panel. Most of the conversation to date seems to be about how do we implement or improve our services using technology. I'd like to see some smart cities rather than the ones we've got at present. I believe that there's a lot of effort put into planning. I see very little evidence that the actual implementation of the plans follows the actual plans themselves. In fact, I think there's been a lot of discouragement of people's involvement. We've moved to extensive areas of code assessment with planning schemes. We, in fact, discourage people from contributing inputs to it. I'd like to see how technology can be used to make certain the plans that we all come up with, in fact, can be implemented.
There's a fantastic example of that, if I may, Kelly. The Sunshine Coast has actually just released in July, or actually got up and running, a new solar farm. And it's designed to actually power the utility of the administration building itself, plus the services that the council's connected to running, so the parkland lighting as well as the sports arenas. But what's fascinating about it is that although it was part of its planning process to develop, and it's now actually gotten ahead and done it, it's actually monitoring the use of energy online so that the community can see how much and what of energy and where that energy is being used from, so from which facilities. So it's becoming a process of being able to, community going online and having these wonderful dashboards to be able to see, well, what is this utility doing in terms of energy use? What are the kilowatt hours of use, and which days is it actually being drawn on more? And so how does that translate into ratepayer dollars saved? So that is the idea of smart cities, that we would be able to have transparent access to more of the facilities that governments are working on, and getting using the monitoring services to identify ourselves on the internet just how effective they are. So there's some great examples of that being developed at the moment, but I really do think that we need to have 10-year plans and 20-year plans so that we can and monitor what happens every 3 or 4 years, like they do in New South Wales and Victoria. Otherwise, we'll be only thinking about what's happening today, and not sort of seeing ahead and sort of missing the opportunities and the challenges that we've got coming downstream.
Just up here, then over there.
Yeah, hi, it's Derek from Ashgrove. I won't say much more than that. Liked a lot of the comments made, I guess a combination of comment and then question. Kat, you talked about bandwidth being an issue. I think the monitoring of environmental consumption in Sunshine Coast is a similar example. I see one of the challenges really being about recognising and accepting the trade-offs of what we prioritise, so that we can cover it from a bandwidth point of view. So to me, I see that's one of the biggest challenges ahead for smart cities. If you were to look at what the biggest challenge that we face in becoming a smarter city, what would you say those challenges are? What can we do as a community to help address those as well?
Great question.
Oh, thanks. I'm keen to take on the challenge. I think it's how we think. It's honestly how we think. I think one of the biggest shifts that we've seen in the last 10 years, and it's only going to amplify over the next 10 to 20, is in the old days we used to wait for governments of all levels to do things for us. I often cite the example of when Dolly the sheep was first cloned, and we all kind of sat there with our mouths agape, and it was like, wow. And I was both just stunned at the scientific step and horrified at the ethical implications of what that meant. But a few minutes later, after the news article had finished, you kind of sat back and went, that's okay. Smarter people than I will figure out the ethics of that. So there are people who are sorting that out. That's not what happens anymore. The role of government has changed and is changing because our role is changing. We expect a level of service that we can get from eBay or Amazon. We expect that kind of same level of interaction. And And in fact, one of my favourite public transport apps is a privately developed app called Move It that does it 10,000 times better than any government I've yet seen in their public transport planning app. So I think the biggest challenge that we have is how do we actually match up at the right speed this desire for non-government people to contribute, to do stuff, to create new solutions to civic challenges, and at the same time enable governments of all levels to change fast enough. If you've been watching the drama that's rolled out with the federal government's DTO, Department of the Digital Transformation Office, and how that hasn't worked because of the constraints of the system, not because there was any one person who was wrong, but because of the constraints of the system. So I think our biggest challenge at the moment to developing smart cities is how we all collectively think and navigating the required bureaucracies. You know, like we often cop flack for you guys are too slow. We're spending your money. There's actually, you know, there's governance in place for a really good reason.
Does that though play into what Elizabeth and Howard had both brought up, that there isn't enough trust though, that in that changing world that we have, that actually we don't want government to make that final decision without asking us first what we think. And I suppose they can't do it for every little thing, but if they're going to make major decisions, like a casino across the river and what's happening over there, or ripping up whatever it is they're going to rip up so that they can put in 5,000 units in an area where 25 houses once were, that actually we want to say, and we don't want to be patronised by the process of consultation. If you're only consulting to make us feel like we've been consulted, then don't bother, and there's quite a bit of that.
And I think that's why transparency as a value of a smart city is really important. The tech enables us to be more transparent. The paradigm enables us to be more transparent. I think the conversation that we have around smart cities needs to evolve out of just tech smarts, but also human connection. How does the tech actually enable us to do this better? And with that transparency, you increase trust. You know, how do you build trust? You make small agreements.
I think it's not just the transparency, but also the accountability.
Yep.
Because what the smart city requires isn't just the quantity of tech, but the quality of the governance, and for that to be improved. In astrophysics, if you try to study a black hole, you can't really, because it sucks in all the kind of light, and so it's difficult to do any experiments.
Are you comparing government to a black hole?
I'm talking about the question.
We weren't going to point that out.
I'm talking about that earlier question around, you know, the governance in a smart city, because we got the plans, and I actually believe that a lot of urban planners are trying to do the right thing, and they are very well-meaning, and the community consultation is trying to be considered and taken into account, and there's research evidence, and there is the community sentiments and so forth, but for some reason that doesn't compare and it doesn't translate into reality that has any kind of relation. And so then you kind of think, well, what else is at stake there? What else is... And so that's kind of where the black hole comes in, because if there's something else going on that you can't really identify, it's invisible, well, perhaps Queensland needs a corruption watchdog.
Perhaps. Okay, one more. Time for one more. I think there was...
We've seen the media dominated by the imminent arrival of Amazon and also general doom and gloom of retail in Australia. So my question is, collectively, what's your opinion on the future of bricks and mortar retail shopping centres, specifically in Australia?
I'm going to throw in a really quick stat. $43 billion was spent online in Australia in the last financial year. 76% of that was to local outlets. So it's not as bad as it sounds.
Is that the way it will continue, though? This is the thing, once Amazon gets in, once we get used to it, you know, does that broaden out and we think, oh, wait a minute.
If the local stores deliver a good service, you know, like...
So this is where it's going to change. The actual service that's being delivered will be much more customer friendly, and will be about your experience in that shop or in that bank. I do know that banks are actually finding it tough. They've lost 40% of their walk-through traffic. So people are favouring using the banking services that are online in your handheld devices or on the internet, in your PCs at home or at work. So they are having to step out and meet people at the door and encourage them, be friendly, direct them, save them time.
Be friendly.
And create an experience.
Do they actually want us in there? Because I never get the feeling, really, that they want us in there. They actually want us on our devices. If they could shut down every branch and get rid of it and get rid of that staff, sorry, but I don't get the warm and friendlies from banks at all
that's exactly
about staffing and those kind of things.
That's exactly why they're losing. Why they've lost 40% of their walk-through traffic, because they are encouraging cheaper services and online. And of course that makes sense because Commonwealth Bank, ANZ, all of the big banks, Westpac, etc., they are all on the share market, and it makes perfect sense to their shareholders rather than to their customers, or possibly with their customers as well, to give better online experience, but also better walk-through experience. And that is what cities are having to do as well. A lot of the decision-making that's going on is now being undertaken collectively by, regional cities are grouping together. We're experiencing, a lot more knowledge and information from overseas, but also governments are experiencing that communities are creating makers labs and they're creating commons shared spaces. So I was recently over in San Francisco and I participated in I actually went to a startup that had aluminium blocks that they would 3D route, to create a nice scientific piece of equipment for somebody. But the designs were open sourced, so that they were coming from anywhere in the world, and that open sourced intellectual property was just remaining there to be shared, so that we had this kind of quasi-capitalist but quasi-sort of socialist hybrid happening. Now that's what is also happening for governments. We are seeing communities taking a lot more interest in decision-making processes, creating plans, putting them on the internet, sharing them with their friends, and saying to governments, what do you think about this? So public-private partnerships are emerging, and this is the future where there's a lot more control and shared control, not only between community and government, but also between them and industry as well.
But the other thing for me should be we're worrying about brick and mortar, like the big Westfields, for example, when they didn't worry about the smaller, village shopping centres and things like that. They didn't care. So, yeah.
And you're on private land, right? So you actually have to adhere to the bylaws. So you can't bring your dog, you can't chew gum. There might be all sorts of regulations that are out of our control because it's up to the corporate entity that writes those bylaws, right? And so those implications are being mapped right now by a colleague of mine about London, the decline of public spaces available to Londoners. But it would be really interesting to translate this into the Australian context and actually say, well, do we still have public space in the original meaning of the word public?
Yeah. This has been a fascinating conversation. We are unfortunately out of time on my smartwatch, which tells me everything, including when to wake up, when someone's ringing, blah, blah. I'd like to thank our four panellists so much for this evening's fantastic conversation. Thank you. Dr. Colin Russo, Pat Matson, Marcus Foth, Ellen Broad. Thank you very much. Thank you as well for coming along. I hope you can come back on November 1st because we will be talking about digital humans, how tech is changing our bodies. And by then we'll probably all have an implant just in there so we can swipe away. Thank you very much. I hope you've had a good evening. And remember to go to the Digital Futures Lab if you get time. It's absolutely amazing. It's great in there. Thank you.